Bradley Thornfield, once so sure of his identity, was 35 years old and the owner of a Denver furniture restoration shop, a place where the scent of wood stain and linseed oil permeated every corner. He considered himself a disappointment to his father, Harrison Thornfield, a real estate magnate with a $180 million fortune who expected heirs worthy of his empire. But Bradley preferred sawdust under his fingernails to stock reports, finding more satisfaction in restoring antique furniture than in business deals. However, this settled world shattered in an instant at Harrison's 70th birthday celebration, when his father publicly slapped him across the face in front of 200 guests. The resounding slap, like the bang of a judge's gavel, echoed through the opulent ballroom of the Aspen estate. "You disgrace our name," Harrison thundered, his words reverberating under the high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. "I disinherit you. All $180 million will go to Preston and Cordelia. You will receive nothing." Instantly, phone screens lit up. Cousin Dennis was already live streaming, and relatives, business partners, and even the waitstaff aimed their cameras at Bradley, as if he were an exotic beast putting on a show. The video immediately went viral, and the headline, "Billionaire Disinherits Son at Birthday Party," became the main topic of the evening. Bradley's humiliation was amplified and consumed by millions of strangers who knew nothing of the true reasons behind the incident. Harrison Thornfield, a stately man standing 6'2" with impeccably styled silver hair, looked formidable even at 70. That evening, he wore a custom-tailored Italian suit, likely costing more than Bradley's half-year income. His cold gray eyes instantly assessed the value of everything, it seemed, except his own son. Harrison had built his empire on ruthlessness, a knack for seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles, and never showing weakness. Bradley, however, was not just weak, but living proof that even Harrison Thornfield could fail. Veronica Thornfield, the woman Bradley had called mother for 35 years, stood beside her husband in a black evening gown that accentuated her regal posture. At 68, she meticulously maintained her appearance, understanding it was a valuable currency in their circle. Her blonde hair, professionally colored every 3 weeks, was styled in an elegant chignon. A smile was fixed on her face, one that never reached her eyes, especially when she looked at Bradley. At the moment of the slap, something flickered across her face, perhaps guilt, fear, or simply disappointment at her husband's outburst. The truth about that night, the events preceding it, and what followed, begins with the realization that every family harbors its secrets. Some are minor, like Harrison's long-standing affair, which Veronica preferred not to know about. Others are more serious, like Preston's gambling addiction, which miraculously disappeared after a large sum vanished from one of Harrison's funds. But there were secrets that turned everything upside down. Bradley Thornfield had no idea he wasn't who he thought he was. He was Jacob Carroll, abducted from a park in Portland at 6 months old. He was raised by people who lived a lie every day for 35 years. Every birthday cake, every Christmas morning, every family photograph was built on a foundation of abduction that destroyed his real parents' lives and created a fictitious one for him. The morning after Harrison's party, 3 lawyers knocked on his door. Judith Blackstone, Arthur Reeves, and Calvin Park didn't look like angels of retribution, but that's precisely what they were. "We represent your biological father," Judith said softly but firmly. "Magnus Carroll has been searching for his kidnapped son for 35 years. Calvin opened his briefcase and produced a folder containing information about his real life, stolen before he could even comprehend it. Sudden revelations, like flashes of lightning in the night, can completely overturn one's worldview. A casual photograph, capturing his biological parents holding an infant, or an antique silver bracelet with a tiny train, which he had worn since childhood, became the starting point for realizing the bitter truth. The awareness that the foundation of his identity was built on another's malevolence plunged him into a chasm of despair in his humble workshop. Only the fruits of his own labor surrounded him, furniture lovingly restored by his hands, though now he wondered whose hands had truly put in the effort. Among the Thornfield family, he had always felt like an outsider, a black sheep, unable to understand why his choices pained Harrison so deeply. While his younger brother Preston moved millions on Wall Street, turning them into even larger fortunes with the mere press of a key. He spent his days hunched over a workbench, giving a second life to wood others considered dead. His sister Cordelia, by her 30s, headed her own law firm with 40 employees and clients from Colorado's political elite. She owned a luxurious corner office with panoramic views of downtown Denver. His lot was a modest workshop, once a tire shop, where the afternoon sun streamed through the dust like golden rain. And this workshop was his sanctuary. Every morning, long before the world began to make its demands, he would arrive and immerse himself in the atmosphere of objects awaiting their moment. Antique Victorian chairs with broken backs, water-damaged Art Deco tables, grandfather clocks frozen in time decades ago. Each piece held its own story, a history of love and care preceding its decay. Clients entrusted him with their heirlooms, their memories, and he treated this responsibility with the utmost seriousness. Mrs. Dolores Ashworth, his favorite client, had over time become much more than just a customer. At 78, she maintained such a regal bearing that one involuntarily wanted to straighten up in her presence. She brought him items found at estate sales, always carefully wrapped in old blankets and accompanied by fascinating stories. This secretary belonged to a railroad magnate's widow, she would say, running her cracked fingers over the damaged wood. She wrote love letters at this desk for 50 years. Can you imagine how much love this wood has absorbed? Sometimes she would look at him with a long, scrutinizing gaze, as if trying to read a book in a half-forgotten language. "You have gentle hands, Bradley," she remarked once, as he showed her the results of his work on a Japanese tea table. "It's a gift that comes from the depths of your soul. It cannot be taught. It cannot be bought. It simply is." Tensions with Harrison became particularly acute from the age of 18, when he announced his decision not to attend Harvard Business School as planned. Instead, he chose the Rhode Island School of Design, where he studied furniture design and restoration. Harrison paid for his tuition, but made no secret of his displeasure. "You're wasting your potential," he would repeat at every holiday dinner, every birthday, whenever he had an opportunity to mention his work. "Any fool with sandpaper can restore furniture." His mother, Veronica, tried to play the peacemaker, but her efforts amounted to trying to change his mind, not to temper Harrison's expectations. "Bradley, dear," she would say in a voice that sounded like honey but stung like whiskey, "you could pursue your furniture hobby on weekends. Many successful executives have artistic interests. Look at your father's friend, Mr. Cromwell. He paints watercolors, but he also runs a billion-dollar investment firm." Monthly dinners at the country club became a true ordeal. Harrison presided at their usual table with a view of the 18th hole and introduced him to his business partners with barely concealed disappointment. "This is my eldest son, Bradley. He's in the furniture business." The pause before the word furniture always hung in the air like an unpleasant odor. Then he would hastily switch to Preston's latest achievements or Cordelia's high-profile cases, and his voice would brighten as if someone had finally turned on a light. 5 years ago, Harrison offered him a position as vice president of development in his company. The offer included a 7-figure salary, a company car, stock options, and a clear understanding that he was being groomed to manage part of his empire. He refused it on a Tuesday afternoon in his office, watching as disbelief, anger, and finally, a cold contempt, which had not thawed since that day, washed over his father's face. "You choose poverty," he said in a flat, unequivocal tone. "You choose to be a nobody when you could be somebody." "I choose to be myself," he replied, unaware of how ironic those words would prove to be in the future. The only ray of understanding in Brad's life was Uncle Theodore, Harrison's younger brother. A philosophy professor at the University of Colorado, Theodore seemed to Harrison just another example of wasted Thornfield genes. "Brad, you know what your father's real problem is?" Theodore once said after a particularly tense family dinner. "He just can't imagine success unless it's wrapped in a dollar sign. But you and I know that the true meaning of life isn't measured in square footage of real estate or the size of a stock portfolio." On the day of Harrison's 70th birthday, after many years, a flicker of hope ignited in Brad's heart. He had dedicated 3 months to meticulously restoring an antique piece, believing it might finally thaw the ice in their relationship. It was a 1920s mahogany writing desk that had once belonged to Harrison's father, Brad's grandfather. Although, as he now understood, it was just another false thread in the tapestry of lies that his life in the Thornfield family had turned out to be. The celebration was held at Harrison's Aspen estate, a massive mountain chalet seemingly plucked from the pages of architectural magazines showcasing how the ultra-rich envision rustic chic. 2,000 square meters of imported stone and reclaimed wood, with windows that transformed the Colorado mountain landscapes into living paintings. 200 guests gathered to celebrate Harrison Thornfield's 70th birthday, and the parking lot became a display of luxury automobiles. Brad parked his well-worn Ford pickup between a Bentley and a Tesla, the mahogany desk wrapped in moving blankets in the truck bed. He arrived early to install the desk in Harrison's study as a surprise. The staff knew Brad well enough to let him through the service entrance without question. They had observed this dysfunctional family for too long to interfere in their dramas. Brad spent an hour positioning the desk exactly where the old one had stood, carefully adjusting the leather inlay to properly reflect the light from the window. The desk's restoration had taken 3 months, finding era-appropriate hardware, custom-matching the original stain through dozens of trials, replacing the leather with an identical texture. It was, perhaps, Brad's finest work. The party began at 6, and by 7, Harrison was in his element. He loomed in the center of the main hall, a glass of 30-year-old whiskey in hand, surrounded by admirers and business partners who laughed at his jokes as if their contracts depended on it. Preston was deep in conversation in the eastern part of the room, discussing cryptocurrencies and market volatility with a group of investors. Cordelia hosted guests by the fireplace, charming a state senator who was clearly interested in more than just her legal advice. Brad kept to the side, finding solace in conversation with Uncle Theodore, who, despite his expensive suit, looked as out of place as he did. "You look good, Brad," Theodore said, clinking his beer mug against Brad's. They were the only ones drinking beer at a party where champagne cost more than most people's monthly car payments. "The shop's going well," Brad replied, genuinely happy to share something positive. "I just landed a contract with the Denver Historical Museum. They want me to restore an entire collection of Gold Rush-era furniture." Theodore's eyes lit up. "That's fantastic! Real cultural preservation work. You should be proud." At that moment, Harrison's voice, like a clap of thunder, cut through the room, slicing through every conversation. "Bradley, come over here, son. Tell everyone about your little hobby shop." The condescension in his voice was so thick it could be touched. All eyes in the room turned to Brad. He saw phones being pulled out, socialites scenting drama like sharks scent blood in the water. Cousin Dennis was already filming before Brad took his first step toward Harrison. Nadine had secured the best vantage point for filming. Even Mr. Cromwell, Harrison's closest business partner, subtly raised his phone. The crowd parted as Brad walked through, their faces a mix of sympathy and anticipation, the kind people wear when they are about to witness a car crash. Harrison stood at the center of his admirers like a king holding court, his gray eyes fixed on Brad with an expression he had seen before. It was the same look Harrison gave when he was about to destroy a business rival. That evening, as tension peaked, Bradley tried to change the subject to avoid further confrontation with his father. "Dad, I wanted to show you something," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I have a gift for you in your study. I think you'll like it." Harrison, already quite drunk, merely laughed dismissively in response. Alcohol had loosened his self-control, but the cruelty in his words was deliberate. "A gift? What could you give me that I couldn't buy 10 times over? Another dusty chair, perhaps, or a refurbished table?" He sneered. The assembled audience chuckled awkwardly. Some averted their gaze, but most watched the unfolding scene with interest. It was more captivating than any entertainment Harrison's money could buy. "You know what would be a real gift for me," he continued, raising his voice, "if you finally showed some ambition instead of fiddling with sawdust like a child. Do you even realize what people say about you behind your back, about Harrison Thornfield's son, the carpenter, as if you're a biblical figure, not a businessman?" Bradley tried to protest. "I'm not playing, Dad. I have a legitimate business that focuses on preserving historical artifacts. I have employees, contracts, a reputation built on quality work." However, Harrison, his face turning an ominous red, waved him off dismissively. "Business? You call that a business? You earn less in a year than Preston makes in a month, less than Cordelia spends in a week. You're 35, unmarried, no children, living in a converted loft above a workshop that smells of turpentine and failure. Bradley's mother, Veronica, tried to intervene, touching her husband's arm, but he pulled away. No, Veronica. I'm tired of pretending, tired of hoping he'll change, tired of lying to our friends that Bradley is just finding himself. Then he turned back to his son, his eyes cold as winter granite. Want to know what I really think? A deafening slap followed these words. Bradley drove through the Colorado night, his face burning with humiliation. The mountain landscapes blurred before his eyes, but he refused to cry. In the truck bed lay the mahogany desk, wrapped in blankets, a symbol of his naive belief that craftsmanship could matter to a man who measured everything only by money and power. The road from Aspen to Denver felt like a journey to another world, from Harrison's realm of luxury to his own domain of sawdust and honest labor. His phone on the passenger seat vibrated incessantly, but Bradley didn't want to answer. The video of the incident had already gone viral. Dennis had titled his live stream, "Family Fiasco, Billionaire Snaps at Birthday Party." By the time he reached Denver, Bradley had 17 missed calls from journalists, 43 messages from college acquaintances, and a voicemail from Preston. God, Brad, I'm sorry. He went too far. The apartment above the workshop felt like a sanctuary to Bradley. He slowly climbed the exterior stairs, feeling the weight of 35 years lived in his father's shadow. The scent of wood stain and linseed oil greeted him as he opened the door, reminding him of who he truly was when he wasn't trying to be Harrison Thornfield's son. He couldn't sleep. Closing his eyes, he saw the phones pointed at him, heard the crowd's laughter, and felt the sting of the slap. At 2 a.m, he gave up and went down to the workshop. On the workbench sat an unfinished rocking chair, its curves awaiting sanding to reveal the beauty of the cherry wood. Bradley ran his hands over the wood, feeling the texture and the potential yet to be unlocked. In that moment, anger came. Not Harrison's volatile rage, but a cold, focused fury. He had had enough trying to earn the approval of a man who considered his work a disgrace, enough justifying choices that needed no justification. Enough being a Thornfield if it meant suppressing everything creative and meaningful in pursuit of wealth. He pulled out a notepad and began to write a business plan he had previously been afraid to implement: expansion into Santa Fe and Portland, partnerships with museums, an apprenticeship program for young artisans. Getting a loan would be difficult without the Thornfield name, but he had savings, good credit, and a reputation in the restoration community. He could move somewhere where Harrison Thornfield would just be a rich man, not the sun around which his world revolved. At 6 a.m, Mrs. Ashworth's phone call broke the silence. Instinct warned Bradley not to answer, but the persistence of the ringing won out. "Bradley, dear," Mrs. B. Ashworth's voice was warm, but there was an unshakable firmness to it. "I know what happened, that terrible man. Are you all right?" "Everything will be fine," Bradley replied, and for the first time since the humiliating incident he truly believed it. "I'm thinking of leaving Denver and starting a new life elsewhere." "Before you make a hasty decision," she said, and her voice carried an unusual weight, unlike their previous conversations. "I have something important to tell you. I've known your family for half a century, Bradley. I knew Harrison when he was just starting to build his first apartment complexes, and Veronica when she desperately longed for a child after several failed attempts." Bradley's hand tightened on the phone receiver. "Mrs. Ashworth, what are you getting at?" "There are some facts about your father, about you, about how you became their son, that always raised questions. The timeline of events. Bradley, you supposedly appeared in their lives at the age of 2, but there isn't a single photograph taken before that moment. No birth announcement, no records from the Denver hospital where Veronica claimed to have given birth to you. That proves nothing. Maybe they lost the photos, maybe the records were misplaced." "Perhaps," she replied softly. "Or perhaps the reason you could never be the son Harrison wanted is because you were never meant to be. Please be home tomorrow morning around 9. Believe me, Bradley, I've waited 35 years to right a terrible wrong, and it seems fate has finally given me that opportunity." At precisely 9 o'clock, 3 distinct knocks echoed through the apartment, causing Bradley to freeze with a coffee cup at his lips. He carefully placed the cup on the table, walked to the door, and opened it to find 3 people standing before him, as if from a prestigious law firm's advertisement. The woman in front was tall and self-assured. Her black hair, streaked with silver, was neatly pulled back into a chignon, and she wore an elegant charcoal gray suit, likely worth more than his truck. The 2 men flanking her looked equally professional, one older, with kind brown eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses, the other younger, holding a leather briefcase as if it contained secret codes. "Bradley Thornfield?" the woman asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Yes." "My name is Judith Blackstone. I'm a senior partner at Blackstone Reeves & Associates. These are my colleagues, Mr. Arthur Reeves and Mr. Calvin Park. We represent your biological father. May we come in?" These words crashed over Bradley like an icy shower. His biological father? There must be a mistake. Harrison Thornfield is my father. I have a birth certificate, a social security number. My whole life proves that Harrison Thornfield is my father. "Mr. Thornfield," Judith said in a soft but firm voice, "we represent Magnus Carroll. He has been searching for his kidnapped son for 35 years. His son was abducted from Laurelhurst Park in Portland when he was just 6 months old. That son's name is Jacob Carroll. 3 months ago, a DNA match from a genealogical website confirmed what Magnus had suspected for years. You are Jacob Carroll." Bradley's legs felt numb. "This is absurd. You're saying I was kidnapped? That Harrison and Veronica kidnapped me?" "May we come in?" Judith repeated. "This conversation shouldn't happen in the hallway, and what we have to show you will require you to sit down." Bradley stepped aside in a daze, watching as the guests entered the apartment with practiced efficiency. Calvin immediately placed his briefcase on the coffee table and began to retrieve documents. Arthur moved to the window, taking a position as if overseeing a security operation. Judith sat opposite Bradley, maintaining her impeccable posture and looking at him with a sympathetic but resolute gaze. The meeting began with a delicate statement. Your biological father, Magnus Carroll, insisted on extreme caution, especially after the incident at Harrison Thornfield's party. We are aware of the events. The video has been reviewed. Calvin continued, explaining that Magnus had observed the young man's life for 3 months since the DNA match was discovered, seeking absolute certainty before turning his world upside down. Calvin then retrieved a photograph from the folder and slid it across the coffee table. The picture, taken 6 weeks before the abduction, showed a happy young couple in a park. A tall, dark-haired man with piercing green eyes, exactly like the young man's, held a baby in his arms. Beside him stood a woman whose features, her nose and jawline, were unmistakably his own. But his gaze was drawn to the bracelet on the child's tiny wrist, a silver bracelet engraved with a tiny train. The same one he had worn for 35 years, believing it to be a Thornfield family heirloom passed down from his father. This symbol of heritage, a connection to his grandfather. "This can't be," he whispered. But in his mind, the pieces of the puzzle were already beginning to fit. The absence of baby photos before age 2, his dissimilarity to Harrison and Veronica, the strange glances from distant relatives, as if they saw a ghost, and especially Uncle Theodore's gaze. Calvin presented a police report dated June 15, 1990. It detailed the abduction of 6-month-old Jacob Carroll from his stroller while his nanny was distracted by a woman asking for directions. The description of the woman, given by the nanny, Maria Santos, considering the age, strikingly matched Veronica Thornfield's appearance. Arthur quietly added that Maria Santos had died 15 years ago, leaving a deathbed confession to a priest. She had been paid $50,000 to look away for 5 minutes. She believed the child was going to a loving family unable to have children, and didn't realize it was an abduction until she saw the news, but by then it was too late. Judith emphasized that Magnus Carroll was not just a man searching for his son, he was the founder and CEO of Carroll Industries, holding patents for advanced aerospace technology and renewable energy. His company developed navigation systems for half the world's commercial airlines. The final document was Magnus's will, updated annually for 35 years, with an unchanging clause about Jacob. The young man was the sole heir to an estate estimated at approximately $2.8 billion. The room swam before his eyes, his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, crushed by the weight of 35 years of lies. 3 months had passed since then, and each day felt like taking first steps in a world where the ground constantly shifted beneath him. DNA tests confirmed with 99% certainty he was Jacob Magnus Carryle, abducted from Laurelhurst Park on a sunny morning when his nanny, Maria Santos, was paid to look away. The woman who distracted her, asking about a non-existent hospital, was Veronica Thornfield in a wig and sunglasses, desperate for a child after 4 miscarriages that had broken her from within. Harrison and Veronica were arrested 2 weeks after the lawyer's visit. The FBI had secretly been working the case, receiving DNA evidence from Magnus. The arrest occurred at their country club, right in the middle of their golf game, in front of the elite who had witnessed Harrison slap him on his birthday. This time, Dennis couldn't live stream, but news channels captured every moment of the arrest. Harrison's face blazed with fury. He shouted about lawyers and connections, claiming it was a mistake. The evidence spoke for itself, leaving no room for doubt. Forged adoption papers claiming he had been adopted through a non-existent Mexican agency, bribed court officials, retroactively entering records into archives, an entire chain of lies that Harrison had maintained with the same meticulousness he applied to real estate deals. Veronica, unable to withstand the pressure, confessed everything during her very first interrogation. She recounted how she stumbled upon the adoption scheme, desperately surfing the internet late at night, how she convinced Harrison it was their only chance, how she lived every day for 35 years in constant fear that someone would notice that he had Magnus's eyes, Eleanor's nose, and not a drop of their blood. Preston and Cordelia learned that all their assets would be confiscated as ill-gotten gains. The irony of fate was both perfect and terrible. Harrison had disinherited him from money that was never truly his, from a fortune partly built on raising a stolen child. Preston called one day, drunk and sobbing, asking for forgiveness for every time he had flaunted his success in his face. Cordelia sent a letter through her lawyer, dry and formal, expressing hope that he would find peace with his true family. But the most striking thing wasn't gaining billions or losing the only parents he had known. It was the first meeting with Magnus. After the lawyers presented the irrefutable evidence, he went downstairs and saw him, standing beside a black sedan. A tall, gray-haired man, like an older version of himself, aged 35 years. He didn't try to hug him, he just stood there, tears streaming down his face, and said, "You still wear that bracelet. I have one just like it. I haven't taken it off once since you disappeared." They had coffee at a small cafe near his workshop, and Magnus told him about Eleanor, his biological mother, who had died 5 years ago from cancer, never losing hope that he was alive. "She decorated your nursery with trains," he said, his voice trembling. "You adored them. You'd make a funny whistling sound when you saw a train. She kept that nursery exactly as it was for 30 years, until her illness became too severe, and we had to sell the house to pay for treatment." Magnus, it turned out, built his empire much like he restored furniture, piece by piece, with patience and precision, with a maniacal passion for quality. "You can't change who you are, son," he said over their third cup of coffee. "Even 35 years of lies couldn't erase your true essence. The way you restore things is how I built Carroll Industries, taking troubled companies and bringing them back to life." Mrs. Ashworth visited him last week and finally told the full truth. She had been Eleanor's best friend in college, his godmother, present at his birth in the hospital. 20 years ago, she moved to Denver for her husband's work, and when she met him at an estate sale, she nearly fainted. "You looked so much like Eleanor, it took my breath away." Since then, she had been investigating, nudging Magnus to check DNA databases, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. He kept his workshop but moved it to Portland, to a more spacious location near Magnus's headquarters. Magnus offered to buy him an entire building, but he refused. "It's mine," he said. "Built by my hands, even if they are Carroll hands, not Thornfield hands." The rocking chair he had been working on that night, the one he had touched while planning his escape from Harrison's shadow, now sits in Magnus's living room. He rocks in it every evening, looking at photos of Eleanor, telling stories of the 6 months they spent together before he was taken. Beside the chair stands the mahogany writing desk he once restored for Harrison. Magnus bought it at auction for 10 times its price, simply to bring it back into the family, as he said, even if it was the wrong one.